Hello, my name is Leah Henderson, and I'm the Experience Design Director here at Sparkbox. Today, we're going to discuss the art of road mapping. Now, this isn't necessarily specific to my design or user experience background, but it helps that I've been involved in project planning for a few decades now. These roadmaps we will discuss help lay the groundwork for what a potential first phase of work would be, and in this case, as you've heard previously today, in regards to an MVP. So let's dive in and get started. First, let's establish what we mean by roadmap. So a roadmap defines the strategic plan, including prioritized goals, milestones, and tasks and deliverables. But we also have considerations that we need to include, such as time to complete the task, team size, and even calendar timing. This roadmap is commonly graphically represented, showing what tasks will overlap and how long they are estimated to take. But they are not detailed like a Gantt chart, but a higher level overview. So think more like 30,000-foot view of a plan for the overall MVP. These roadmaps are most helpful in establishing constraints. We know constraints are normal with any project, and although it can sound like a negative sometimes, it really does allow teams to stay focused and streamlined. We aren't chopping off limbs with these constraints. Think of it more like working holistically within them. So let's start with discussing the top constraints on any project, and those are scope and timeline. Scope and timeline go hand in hand. One covers what we can do, and the other how long it will take. In this case, when discussing road mapping, the scope we're referring to is the tasks needed to complete the MVP. Now, there is a third constraint that works in conjunction with the first two, and that is price. When considering each of these pieces, they're continually dependent on one another. If you shrink one, the others have to adjust. This means each of these constraints shape the overall MVP we're planning. For example, if the timeline can't move, this will affect what we can do, scope, and the overall team size, price. But this can be seen as a flexible a little bit because when a budget is provided, it's not the number that really matters, more what we can do with the money. And these three items help us process how to still be successful. So I've touched on this already, but let's dive into a little bit more detail into why roadmaps are so important. As I've stated, the roadmap is the clearly communicated plan to start an MVP, but it's not fully built on assumptions. This roadmap exercise builds upon the analysis and strategic planning already completed and establishes a starting point for the MVP phase. At Sparkbox, we call this research onboarding, and the roadmap is one of the final pieces to help communicate our plan. This onboarding helps us understand the constraints we discussed earlier, which clearly influences what can be included within that MVP. So this roadmap or plan for our MVP phase merges the work being completed with the team skill set, experience, and time needed to complete it. If you don't consider all of those constraints during the MVP planning, what you can get done will never align with how efficiently the team can actually do the work. Personally, as a UX strategist on a project, this step is essential. During this planning, we need to weigh the importance of each task towards the success of the MVP. I found that for some teams, it's easier to cut out essential pieces that can seemingly take longer. For example, some teams can be quick to cut the steps that test or talk to the user. The teams all know this is important, but it can be easy to slide into the, well, we know what's best for this first round, and then we can test that instead. As UX practitioners, we know this is rarely the case. And without these vital user-centered steps, the MVP being created may not even be useful to the user at all. As strategists, we are responsible for ensuring that the MVP doesn't mean less strategy or planning, just being more intentional with what we include. Our job is to continue championing these steps that we lead to a strong overall experience and success for each of our clients' goals, because the overall experience can't fail, or the MVP will also fail. It is worth noting that the overall art and practice of road mapping is not to be perfect. It is to put the team on a path to get started and communicate a prioritized project plan to the stakeholders and internal team. This visual at the end is less important than the actual task of building it. What it does is allow the team to understand and clearly communicate what needs to be done, the steps it will take, and around how long it will take to complete it. So let's dive in a little bit more into the considerations we make when building these roadmaps. So first, start with the work. Define the scope and prioritize the tasks to meet them. But each task can be taken to varied levels. A great example of this is audits. Do you need a complete assessment of all competitors, direct, indirect, or do you need a high-level understanding of where you sit within your industry? These added guardrails don't mean you remove a task, but it can give you guidance on how in-depth you go to meet your goals. And a lot of this understanding comes from that upfront research and realizing how in-depth you need to go for each step. Next, we consider the deadlines. Is there a defined deadline for the work? If not, set one. Or set some benchmarks of 3, 6, 9, or even 12 months. But please keep in mind, in my experience, anything past 6 months is pretty much fictional. Technology is ever changing, and a company's priorities seem to change just as fast. In my experience, there are usually major shifts in direction past the 6-month mark, if not before. This is why these digestible, smaller chunks of time are so important to focus on during MVP planning. We need to see the full breadth, but also what can be moved on quickly and efficiently in the next few months. Without this deadline-driven planning, teams are just going to spin and burn money instead of staying refined and lean. Remember, guardrails are good when you're iterating. So now we need to consider the overall time needed to be successful and the team size to complete the required tasks. The team should ballpark the number of hours they feel is needed to meet each of the benchmarks you've established. These hours help us understand just how large the team will be needed to complete the task in the allotted time. Which brings us to considering the actual calendar time. When tasks are reliant on collaboration with another team, a user, or additional stakeholders, these tasks will increase the amount of time on the calendar needed, because many times it just takes a minute to get on someone's calendar. Lastly, now that the team has evaluated each of the considerations, they need to visualize the plan in a succinct, clear visual. Each of these should focus on displaying the general tasks, the overlap of additional items, an estimate of how long that effort will take. Roadmap visuals should be customized to communicate to stakeholders effectively. For example, this roadmap I'm showing was needed to not only depict what tasks are being completed, but also that there are 2 different teams working on 2 different goals at the same time. This graphic displays how the team's tasks will overlap and work together simply by changing the color and showing that each track on their own. All in all, it is worth noting that these are not always correct, but think of them more like a starting place. Like everything else, we iterate, because teams use these roadmaps to explore the problem space to help them make the shift from analysis of a problem to how to achieve it. I want to thank each of you for your time, and I'm looking forward to answering any of your questions in the panel later today. Thank you.